glad that you're here. All right, so we're going to start part 2 now of the history of modern Israel. Again, I don't know how many parts this will wind up at the end, but on this one, we're going to look at Western Europe and the rise of Zionism. So if you want to go ahead and put that deck up. Part 2, yes. All right, so we're going to start in France and what's called the Dreyfus Affair. So this happened in 1894. Someone had found a scrap of paper that was outside in a German trash can outside of one of the German embassy areas. And it basically was a note that was promising to sell French military secrets to the Germans. This obviously is a problem. And so that warranted an investigation. And so the Captain Alfred Dreyfus was charged with that crime. And the only evidence that they had was that slip of paper. But there's this other guy there called Colonel Henry. You'll see the sketch of him there, that testified that Alfred Dreyfus was the one that wrote the note. And in the trial, there was a lot of anti-Semitic statements made because Alfred Dreyfus was a Jew, and there was just stuff that went on and on, about it. Even outside, people were protesting and were yelling "Death to the Jews" and stuff like that because of this crime that was done. However, the only thing they had was that slip of paper and the testimony of Colonel Henry, who said that he could not share the other evidence because of the military secrets and stuff that was going on there. And so at the end of the trial, Alfred Dreyfus was convicted to life in prison on a prison on Devil's Island, which was not the most accommodating of places. However, 2 years later, they found another note that had the same handwriting that was used in the Dreyfus Affair, and that, same handwriting, also saying that they were going to try to sell French military secrets to the Germans and all that. And so Alfred Dreyfus was, in prison on Devil's Island. He couldn't have been the author of the second note. So again, that caused quite the controversy, and they finally narrowed it down to a guy named Walter Easterhazy and found that he was the author of those notes. And so that obviously, brings up the thing, all right, where is Alfred Dreyfus at that point? And there was enough commotion about it that they brought him back and did a retrial of him. And, and so they had the proof there, that, he should have been exonerated. But Colonel Henry was upset, and he was basically saying that the integrity of the army was at stake here. And so they amped up the anti-Semitism, the statements around it, and all the rest. And the result of the retrial was that his sentence was reduced from life in prison to 10 years in prison. Yes, for nothing. And it shows you how far, this stuff would get from the anti-Semitism part. However, this caused quite the stir, as you would imagine. And a famous French novelist by the name of Émile Zola put an article in one of the popular newspapers in France that was basically accusing the government of this huge cover-up. And it caused quite the stirring up, and the French president at the time just immediately pardoned Alfred Dreyfus, and so he was let go. Meanwhile, though, people were saying, what about this Colonel Henry? What evidence did he actually have? So they dragged him before the court and demanded that they show the evidence. And the only thing that he could provide was this very clumsy forged document, that he obviously had just done at that point. And so he was thrown in jail himself for doing all that. And he decided in jail not to live it out with all the stuff. He killed himself in jail, which just goes to show, it's like when the demons are done using you, they can't use anymore. They don't like you. They're going to just, chew you up and spit you out, and just for that, all that hatred and all that stuff that was put unjustly, was done, for that. And you can see, kind of, what was done. Alfred Dreyfus, again, he was exonerated, fully exonerated. He actually went back into the military. He retired in 1907. But when World War I broke out, by that time he was in his 50s, but he re-enlisted to help out the French and was an artillery commander and fought in some of the big battles of World War I, including Verdun, which is one of the meat grinder places, in there, and got more medals and all the rest. So it's like, God lifted him up, from that. But that was, just one example of anti-Semitism, that was going on at that time. But it really was the powder keg for this guy, Theodore Herzl. He is a guy, he started off as a lawyer. He was an Austria-Hungarian guy. He started off as a lawyer, but decided he'd rather be into journalism. And so he's writing for a newspaper, and he was covering the Dreyfus Affair for the Viennese newspaper at the time. And he was out hearing the chants of the death to Jews and all the rest. And that really sparked something in him. And so he decided that, the answer was not trying to assimilate, or stay, in that, in each of the countries. And he really had that idea of that really needed a Jewish state, to be created. And so he published in the Jewish Chronicle a solution to the Jewish question, which was around the creation of a Jewish state. Interesting enough, too, he wasn't initially thinking of Palestine. Instead, his first thought was Argentina. Now, that's a long ways away from where Israel is, and it's the bottom of South America. But it makes sense if you look at the times, because Argentina had a good-sized Jewish population. In the 1600s, a number of Jews migrated from Spain to Argentina. And so it had already a good-sized population there. It also, at that point, did not have a lot of anti-Semitism going on there. They were accepted in culture and all that. And he felt that that would have the best place where they could go and buy land and create a territory, the most practical place for them. However, in talking to other people, it was decided that Palestine really was the place that they were trying to get back to the homeland. And so the thought of going to Argentina didn't last that long, but that was the first place that he was really looking at. But he used his influence, quite a bit. Being a journalist, he was well known, and he funded and started the Zionist Congresses. And the first one was held in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. And they had a lot of delegates there, and they were very forward thinking even at that time. So even at the Congresses, they had women voting, in there, which, again, in the United States, women, the 19th Amendment didn't come until the 1940s. So, they were ahead in a lot of ways, on those progressive thoughts then. Also, in some of those Congresses, there were some that were trying to put any Jewish state would have to have favoritism toward Jews first. And Herzl was very much against that, that we should treat everyone the same, and not have favoritism, because that's what caused a lot of the problems that they're seeing in the European countries at the time. And so in that first Zionist Congress, he wrote, "Were I to sum up the Basel Congress in a word, which I shall guard against pronouncing publicly, it would be this: at Basel, I founded the Jewish state." And so from there, he knew he had a lot of people, a lot of other Jews that were, then working together with him, to try to do that. And he used his credentials as a journalist and the funding that they had in order to meet with a lot of different world leaders. So the first one they targeted was the Emperor Wilhelm II of Germany. So ironically, he thought this was the best one for him to target, the one that may be able to give him the most amount of support to establish a Jewish state. He even timed some of the trips when Wilhelm II went to Jerusalem. Herzl went along and tried to meet with him there as well. At first, he only got to see some advisors, but he eventually got to talk to him. But really nothing came out of it. He wasn't able to get any type of help from Wilhelm II, but it was, at least he was starting to get notice, and it was shown to other, at least they started getting some connections. He also met with the Sultan AbdulHamid II of the Ottoman Empire. This is another one where it took him a while to actually get to meet him. He went with some advisors and stuff first and got up the chain. And he tried to make a deal with him that he would consolidate a lot of the debt that the Sultan had for a charter of land in Palestine that Israel could be at or settle in. The Sultan wasn't interested in doing that, and it actually angered or fractured some of his support in Europe at the time too, because many people considered this guy a madman or a butcher, someone who was, oppressing people. And it's just like, and you're trying to make deals, with a person of this caliber. Also, he met with the finance minister of Russia. That was his title at the time that he met him. Later, he became prime minister of Russia. But this was, again, he had a heart toward the Jews and all that stuff. He saw the pogroms that was happening in Russia. And so he was really trying to see what he could do, to try to alleviate or do that. But, it didn't really get anywhere there either. A lot of the doors closed for him, and trying to do stuff in Russia. And finally, the British statesman Joseph Chamberlain in England. He was part of Parliament. You might recognize the last name because his son was named Neville Chamberlain, who was Prime Minister of England right before World War II. He's the guy that met with Hitler, before World War II. But this is his father. And he actually had a lot of good inroads with Britain at that time. Joseph Chamberlain had a lot to do with the different colonies, that was at the time. And he actually got to meet with him several times. And even when they decided the location of the Fourth Zionist Congress, they actually met in London to try to keep, showing the support of Britain and trying to kind of gain favor that way. But one of the things that Chamberlain talked to him about was actually, giving him place in one of the colonies, which was Uganda. You can see it, down to the lower right. It's part of the modern-day Kenya today. But Chamberlain was arranged within the British government that the Jews could relocate there. And it was called the Uganda Project. And it was brought up in one of the congresses, and it actually had kind of this, faction. There was, a number of people that were just wanting, some practical place for them to go to, and others that were really intent on Palestine. And so they put up a vote of whether they should do an exploratory committee to go visit Uganda and check it out. And it passed by, even though it had a lot of resistance to it. And so they went and scouted out the location and all the things and reported the next Congress. And it really didn't really suit them that well. It was a place that had a lot of still wildlife there. There was already indigenous people there that really didn't want the Jews there either. So they weren't welcome really at that place, even though Britain, could have, made made it so or made it that way. And so when they came back, they almost all universally rejected that and had their focus on just staying in Palestine. And then finally, he also met with Pope Pius X. And this was just, again, him reaching out to different world leaders, seeing what could come out from it. But then one of the cardinals came back and said that as long as the Jews deny the divinity of Christ, that the Catholic Church could not help them at all. And so there really wasn't anything that the Catholics could do for it. But here's like just a list of, the number of conferences that they had before World War I. They used to, at the beginning, they met yearly, and then they went to every other year. But you can really see that, there was a lot of stuff growing, at that time. A lot of interest, a lot of people getting together. That's where they were doing some of the different funding type things. The Palestinian Fund, which is set up to try to develop things in Palestine. That's also where a lot of the funding for helping like the Russian Jews finance getting out of Russia or other places to get to, better or safer areas. But you can see that the mechanisms, starting to go, but especially, that mechanism with Britain, which we'll get into at a later time. And that's where we'll end part 2. Okay.
Thank you, Joel. That was good to know.